My name is Kate Trams, and this is the American Indian and Alaska Native Behavioral Health webinar series. Today we have Dr. Annalena Skinstad, and, I should say this presentation was put together by Dr. Annalena Skinstad and Stephanie Bad Soldier Snow, as well as Sean Bear. Stephanie Bad Soldier Snow is not well, and so she's unable to join us in presenting today, but Dr. Skinstad and Sean Bear are here, and so I apologize that I don't have Sean's bio up in our introductions, but you can we can get you his information later if you contact us. So thanks so much for your patience with that. And this training series is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center. We are a part of the ATTC network, which includes 10 regional centers and a network coordinating office. Our website is currently under construction, so our center is not visible on the network website, but we will let you know when that is updated, and we will be getting our website up and running as soon as we can. Our center is a NADAC certified educational provider, and we'd be happy to provide you with CEUs for a $15 fee. The CEU request form is available for download in the Files pod in the webinar screen, and we will also be sending this in a follow-up email to all who attended. Immediately following today's webinar, you will be redirected to our GIPRA evaluation. SAMHSA asks us to evaluate our events in order to provide improved performance assessment and accountability. The survey asks about your satisfaction with the event and will take less than 10 minutes to complete. We thank you in advance for helping us to improve our programs. You will be muted for the duration of this webinar, so please use the Q&A pod to share your questions, and you can use the chat pod, which is not anonymous, if you wanted to make any comments or to be in conversation about what is being discussed in the presentation as well. So today's speakers, we have Dr. Annalena Skinstad, who is the Program Director for the National American Indian and Alaska Native ATTC, which is has been funded since 2012 by SAMHSA and recently received new funding through 2022. Dr. Skinstad has worked with people with substance use disorders for many years, and since 1998 has been working with Native communities in the U.S. on workforce development projects, technical assistance on issues of suicide prevention, holistic treatment of SUDs and program development, trauma-informed care, and SUD and co-occurring mental health disorders. Community-based participatory research is the framework for her collaborations with the tribes. And Stephanie Bad Soldier Snow is who helped put together this presentation, joined the National American Indian and Alaska Native ATTC in January as a program manager and is continuing her work, continually learning more about how to help and heal the Native American community in a holistic way using food and exercise, historical resilience, meditation and positive thought, and tribal ceremonial and linguistic practices. From 2011 to 2013, she served as a core member and cultural consultant to the Tribal Food Sovereignty Initiative. And Ms. Bad Soldier Snow continues to conduct the community education and outreach presentations within the tribal community at K-12 schools, colleges, and universities, and at conferences dealing with such themes as diversity, health and nutrition, history, and sustainable agriculture. And I'll also introduce Sean Bear, who I don't have his bio here, but Sean has been a behavioral health consultant and training coordinator for the National American Indian and Alaska Native ATTC since 2014, I believe, and has been working in behavioral health and substance use, particularly with adolescents for many years. And if you have been a part of our, or have participated in any of our programs, you probably already know who he is. So at this time, I am going to pull up their PowerPoint. This will just take me a minute, and then we'll get started. So Annalena and Sean, are you there and ready to go?
Yes, we are. I hope Sean is too. Am I the one who forwards now? I have
Depends on,
forward the,
you both can, so whoever is speaking can be the one who will um advance the slide. So let me just pull that one up a second. And just so people know too, in the files pod, you can download handouts of this presentation as well as the CEU request form. And like I said, we do send out follow-up emails. We'll have a recording of this webinar available if you wanted to view it again or if you wanted to share it with some of your colleagues. So that email will go out to everyone in the next couple of days. Okay. And
great, thank you. And I will start and also say welcome to our first webinar in the this is very noisy. I'm not sure what's going on. I want to welcome you all. This is our first behavioral health webinar in this grant cycle, and we are very much looking forward to working with all of you the next 5 years. And I think, let's see here. And here is some of the things we want to talk about today. We want to start off because we think understanding the cultural aspect of women and women's roles and women's challenges is something we want to address. What is the native way of thinking about women? What are the strengths that we need to work on rather than the deficit? So then we're going to go into prevention, treatment, and new directions. So what I'd like to do is to give the word over to Sean about how we respect the beliefs of others, how we must respect the beliefs of others.
Okay. Hello, this is Sean Bear again. It's good to be back here on the webinars again. Hope you all enjoy it in the next few years. Yeah, the first opening remarks, we need just kind of remember to take in that many of the tribes across the country have their many different belief systems, practices, traditions, things that pass down from generation to generation. So it's important to understand that not all tribes or people within the different tribes will actually have ever heard this or agree with it.
Sean, do you want me to forward this slide?
Okay, I see where it's at. Okay. So, taken in account though, with these, many of these teachings have been passed down, by the four medicine men of the Algonquian language, 4 generations. But remember, this isn't like a family generations from father to son, or like grandfather to father and father to son. So a lot of times what will happen is a young man may be picked by a medicine man that is a whole lot older. A lot of times, many of them are like grandparents during that time. So kind of remember that, and you should be able to tell that this actually can go way back into at least the 1700s. So. Okay, I believe this is.
Yes. No? Because when we start talking about once upon a time, we think about stigma and how women have been treated in substance abuse treatment settings, and how women have been burdened by the history of the stigmatization and the issue that clinicians believed for many years that there were very few differences between men and women's needs. And here are some of the issues that were told from spiritual beings, and I leave this to you, Sean.
Stephanie, would you like to go?
I think you need to do this.
Okay. So with this here, we need to remember that um, the way that the teachings go is that there was a time when the human beings were not human at all. They were actually spiritual beings. So during this time, they needed to, their whole goal was to become as much like the creator as they possibly can. So there became a time when they didn't even have to speak to each other anymore. Everybody knew what everybody else needed. So that's exactly what they did. But there came a day when one of them realized that they were no longer evolving any longer. So at this time is when they came to the creator and wondered why they weren't evolving. And then that's when the creator spoke to them and said, yes, you are correct. You have actually evolved to the highest state possible at this time. The only way that you would ever be able to evolve any higher is to do so from going through a physical experience. So at that time, then they became a human being. But remembering that and they realized that once they became a human being, a flesh, that they would forget everything they ever knew. They would no longer be able to do the things that they could before. They would no longer have that knowledge. So they would be reborn fresh, forgetting everything, forgetting even their original goal. So it was kind of hard for them. Um, so in order to do that, some had to elect to stay back and remain a spirit, while some became the flesh. And the spiritual beings, they were the ones who would try to come to us throughout our lives to remind us of what needed to be done, and to remember to strive to become more and more as time goes on. The only thing is that because of human desire, the wants, drive, sometimes we forget what we had begun to do. And that was the importance of why the spirits remained where they were in order to help us. So at this time, then, became a time when we would begin our search, in a sense, of ourselves, of who we were, what we were doing here. Of course, there are times when we feel alone. We may worry, ponder upon life, feel hardship. Yet, actually, in being alone is a really good place to be able to find answers. That is the importance of fasting. So many of the natives may tend to fast every year for 4 days without food or water. Um, There are those who go up into the mountains. There are those who go into swampy areas. There are those who just do it right out in the open in the plains with the heat and everything. There's just many different kind of ways of fasting, and that's something that many of the tribes realize, but they may also see them as different, maybe sometimes not right, but we always try to remember to respect other tribes' beliefs because that is the way that they were taught. Um, and remembering that as we go into a silence, go into a fast, ponder prayer, during that time, it might have been because of a hardship or something we experience, maybe a lost loved one, or something that we're trying to do in our life and to move on past these things. But even like a muscle itself, you don't grow through the experience. You actually grow during a time of rest. So that is sort of like a rest when you're taken being away from the physical things in life and going back to, in a sense, a spiritual time.
Thank you very much, Sean. I think the things you mentioned should be in the back of our minds when we start talking about what we in the Western world have started thinking about as prevention and what may work for women, mostly in prevention approaches. And one of the things that I want to say is that any early intervention working with women and substance abuse need to find a less stigmatized way of approaching her. We have developed a training program that focuses on a non-confrontational motivational interviewing with the spirit of motivation interviewing. So that is one way of learning how to do the primary care approach, how to do screening, brief intervention, how to know that there are different tools that need to be worked on with women, and with that, especially in a early intervention, let's say, in the primary care, focus on what is not going to make it possible for her to feel ashamed. I know that's not necessarily easy, but the main thing is to focus not on shaming her. And also older women from Native communities respond much better to primary care intervention. Of course, in communicating with women in childbearing age, we always need to have a focus on how can we prevent women who may want to be pregnant, who are pregnant, from using drugs or any other kind of substance. We are located in the College of Public Health, and we are focused on teachable moments. And oftentimes, when we meet women in the emergency room, it is finding the teachable moment to try to address issues of substance abuse when she's depressed, when she might be suicidal, and when she may be very upset about her abuse, her victimization. And what we need to remember is that oftentimes when women are victimized in very many different ways, it is under the influence of alcohol as well. I want to also highlight the program that Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium has developed, and it is actually a program that has been in operation for 50 years It started with the community health workers, and the main thing with the behavioral health aides is that they are located in their communities. They are in the villages, and it's often a person who will approach their tribal fellow citizen and talk about concerns that have come to their attention. The other thing that I think is very important, and we will mention it many times during the presentation, is that Native women really need support. And peer support specialists would be a group of providers that would be important to include. And again, thinking about this from a recovery-oriented care model, holistic approach, and thinking about how can we help her reduce the likelihood of a relapse. That being said, as we know, substance abuse is a relapsing disorder, and we need to be prepared to deal with that. Here is some of the teachings that Sean has mentioned before. Would you like to address this, Sean?
Stephanie?
Sure, I can step in. Hello, everyone. This is Stephanie, Bad Soldier Snow. Really grateful to be here today. One of the things that we are taught in our way, in our customs, is that we have an understanding that we are made of both male and female energies. We're also part of the life-giving breath of the Creator, and we are physical flesh that is made from Mother Earth. And when we leave the world, we go back to the Creator in spirit form, and Mother Earth, we return back to Mother Earth. And what I always remember being told was that these bodies are borrowed. The physical body is borrowed. And so you don't put anything of contaminants or anything into that body. And so then when you go back into the earth, you are helping to keep the earth clean as well. So men and boys were taught to honor the female, and the women and girls were taught how to honor the male. There's always a balance. We understand that there's a difference between roles of men and women because of biology, but that overall there's a balance between the two, and that there is equality between the two, and each has gifts that are recognized and honored. And this is the way that it's meant in all of creation, and that there is always a balance of male and female in all of that. Balance in life, is everything, and that means even within ourselves.
So as you can see, this slide indicates that we are all teachers and all students. So women are also meant to be teachers and students to each other.
Okay, so this part here, it had gone into, if you look back at the male and female aspects of each person, is that this is part of the teachings that are inherent, and it's part of the teachings of how the Two-Spirit kind of came to be, and also what the Two-Spirit come to remind us of. So in doing this, so looking at, in a sense, of how each person are actually two-spirited to begin with, yet not. How is this, you might ask? So are there any answers that somebody might be able to give us? You can type on little thing for question and answers and see what you think right now? If you're having some difficulty with that, you can go to the hint is what is the longest and hardest road one will ever travel in life?
And you don't necessarily have to write it in here, but you can write it to yourself. And I know someone is trying to type something in, which I'm delighted at. Sometimes people don't feel like sharing.
Okay.
But these are things that I think are important for us to consider when we work on working with women.
So they say that the hardest road one will ever take in their life is from one's head to their heart. But part of the teachings is also is that the very first time you're able to do this or make this kind of journey, you will not stay there for very long. So then during this time is when you have to practice. And the more often you're able to do this, the wider that road will become and the easier it will become to maintain utilizing both the mind and heart together.
Sean, we have a question from Valerie, who asks if do you mean that everyone is two-spirited and not everyone can see it?
From the teachings that are given about two-spirited and how people are made, yes. But in the same way, we have a male and female part of us. So the way that it's told is like, even though we have one body, part of us is male, part of us is female, but it tends to differentiate between whether the male is more masculine or female, or if the female is more masculine or male. If both tend to go are more masculine, then of course the person will be more masculine. If they both tend to go more feminine, then the person will be more feminine. But also there's a balance. And the thing about it is to remember that balance in life is what's really important. And that's part of the reason why the two-spirited people come, to remind us of these teachings.
And these teachings are important to, again, have in the back of your mind when you start thinking about assessment and treatment. And before we start that, oftentimes when we use the word assessment, unfortunately, we are focusing on the deficit. What do we need to change? And not necessarily about the strength. And I think the strength in the community, the strength in the teachings are very important to bring back to the woman's mind when you start talking about where are we going to work, what are we going to focus on, and how are we going to help you. In other words, when we meet her, we need to have a non-judgmental attitude. And we need to be very sensitive to the fact that we're talking to a woman who may be identified as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or who may be not identified that way. It's a very good thing to ask questions rather than sort of the revolver interview of assessing weakness. So you need to ask where her culture comes from. What do you think about how your teachings affect you? And also understand that every time a woman is responding to her needs, she is stretching it. She is suddenly having to think about others, think about herself and not others. And remembering that to be for others very often is a way she is approaching a problem or her own issues. We also need to think about the PTSD prevalence in our Native communities and especially Native women. And we know that a lot of the PTSDs come from being witness to or having experienced an accident, but also part of growing up in a Native community is to hear about the historical and the generational traumas that have been inflicted on the tribal communities for years. And even though someone may be living in an urban area, that doesn't mean the historical and generational trauma is not present in her mind, because she's been listening to her family members. She may have been listening to her elder, her grandmother, and seen stories. And I'd like to use one story that a friend of mine told me. They tried to figure out why one of their female grandmothers had red hair. And they went back and tried to listen to stories and remembered or were able to trace back. The reason why she had a red hair was that she had been raped by a soldier between during the Trail of Tears, between wherever she came on the East Coast to a tribal community close to the West Coast. So these stories are present, and they affect others, and they affect the women you are talking to. And likewise, sexual and physical abuse, neglect issues, poverty is very important to have in the back of our mind, and know that there is a very high level of co-occurring mood disorders, depression in Native women and Native community. And one of the things that I think we need to think about as clinicians is that when you have been exposed to so many traumas and atrocities through hundreds of years, it is very difficult to feel that you have control over your future. And part of what you want to do in your evaluation of the level of trauma is to make sure that you understand how much does she think she can control her future. Let's switch gears and think about treatment issues. And of course you know that a lot of treatment has taken place over the last 20, 30 years where we have seen that gender-specific issues have been included in the treatment services. A lot of your colleagues may also have realized that women who've been exposed to a lot of traumas and maybe traumas at the hand of men would feel safer in a gender-specific program. We also need to make sure that she has support from her significant others. We know that is specifically important for Native women. Single gender group, very important, and also single gender treatment programs. Sometimes outpatient programs may be difficult for her to engage in because of lack of transportation. So transportation issues also need to be taken into consideration and figured out how can you deal with that. How can you assist her with transportation issues? And the reason why I'm saying that is that a very wise woman in California in around 2000, and it's also part of my experience working with women through many, many years, is that our way of thinking about when we're ready to take on treatment is dependent on a lot of different variables. Transportation being one, feeling secure being another, making sure that your children and your elders are taken care of, and also making sure that you feel safe and supported. And Vivian Brown actually rewrote the Stages of Change model based on all the considerations that women took into account before they decided to be ready or express their readiness for treatment. When it comes to content of treatment, we've talked about reducing feelings of shame and finding ways of increasing her self-esteem. I once visited a inpatient treatment program on a tribal land in the upper Midwest that treated women and children together, and one of the things that was very high in the provider's mind was how can we bring back the pride in all the things we have learned to do, the beading, the projects with making pottery, weaving pots and baskets, all those things were part of the treatment program. And why was that important? It is important because you saw the pride and the increase in self-esteem among the women who were in the treatment program. Of course, it goes without saying we need to implement trauma-informed care with Native women. We also know we need to think about prevention, relapse prevention, and mindfulness thinking. And that has shown to be very important in treatment of Native women. Some of you may know the literature on mindfulness, and that's part of what we base these suggestions on. It needs to be a holistic approach. She is living in a community. She has children. She has responsibility for her elders, and she needs to be able to balance that with her own healthy living. And again, how can we help her increase her level of feeling of control over her life and her family's life? As you know, we know that women are exposed to domestic violence and that self-esteem issues are really very hard to enhance if she continues living in a domestic violence situation, because part of that domestic violence may be putting her emotionally down. Also, what we have seen is that the relationship she has to her children needs to be in focus, and the family issues that she may be faced with. And parenting, how do you increase the Native way of parenting, and how do you set realistic expectation towards your children is very, very important. Native women need to be strengthened through knowledge and how substances affect your whole body. not just the fact that you digest it, but it also affects your mind and your physical being. So in other words, the treatment issues need to focus on wellness, honoring the culture, include spirituality in the treatment, make sure she is in a supportive environment, and enhance her peer support, and engage her in Native Women in Recovery and the organizations that have been established to specifically focus on supporting Native women. And of course, focus on sexuality and safe sex practices. Recovery-oriented care, and think in healing to wellness courts. We just published a newsletter with this focus, and for women, this is a very important way to get support, to help being kept on track, to forget that if you are not taking care of yourself, you are not going to take care of your family, and remind her that she can't forget that. And very many approaches include the medicine wheel. And the medicine wheel, as I'm sure you've understood from Sean and Stephanie, looks different from community to community. So when Sean and Kate developed our depiction of the medicine wheel, we wanted to include all the colors that you can find in different tribal communities. And the treatment approach needs to take care of the 4 directions to make sure you are focusing on emotion, mind, spirit, and body. Sean, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. So then, I don't know. I know there's like some of the tribes that go by the 4 directions, and some will say the medicine wheel. So that's also part of what is coming up soon. Is about, in a sense, it's a hoop, a medicine hoop, where many people follow these teachings in their life and stuff. With the 4 directions or 4 directions medicine wheel, many times what you do is you'll see the arrow that keeps going around. So you come into this world, and normally what happens is your body grows. You know, you become a little bit more mature. Your body is like growing really fast. During the time of adolescence, I mean, we're very emotionally driven. It's something that we also need to try to control. When we're an adult, we begin to be able to master our mind a little bit more over our emotions and such. In later age, especially, is when our spiritual side really kind of comes out. But it can also come out in any one of these areas. So then each one of these is like you're going from, in a sense, from birth to, in a way, rebirth, because we don't really believe in a death. So then it's just passing from one world to the next. So, but that's one way of looking at it. There are other ways, in a sense, that in each one of these directions, many people say the grandfathers of the West, the North, the East, the South, but the way that I was taught is there's both the grandmothers and the grandfathers in each one of these directions. And each one of those directions are also teachers. So they teach you from that direction. One way of looking at it is going all the way around. One way of looking at it is going from one section to the next, which many people may only cover one section in one lifetime. So then it could take them 4 lifetimes to be able to go all the way around. But there are those who will go all the way around within these teachings once, and sometimes more. Very spiritual medicine people can go around many times. So and each time the teachings become faster and faster, And in the end, what they say is that there will be a time when you are gaining teachings and, in a sense, testing from more than one direction. And ultimately, you have to go through all of them at the same time.
Thank you very much, Sean. We, in our center, developed a program that we have adapted to several tribal communities and tested out in several tribal communities. And eventually we will be training on this and doing more systematic research. However, what we have done is to include very much the medicine wheel, how to take care of the physical and mental health, how to make sure diet and nutrition is included, how to exercise, how to be part of your community, and how to make sure you are taking care of yourself spiritually. I'm sure you have heard the pressure from many angles, from insurance companies, from the federal government, that you need to inform and use evidence-based practices. And what we very often say is that some Western approaches have been adapted culturally, and we call that culturally informed practices. And we know that motivational interviewing, working with women, is successful. We know that networking family therapy is successful, that people are grounded in their family and with support from their family. We've also seen community reinforcement approach being adapted to the Navajo culture. And we've already talked about mindfulness and relapse prevention, and that has also been culturally informed. And we know that suicide prevention also has been adapted culturally. There's always been some question, is cognitive behavioral therapy some approach that might be good to use and utilize when you work with Native providers? The jury is out. However, it has been adapted, and it has shown a success. But some people like using cognitive behavioral therapy with the cultural informed way of doing it. Others do not. We know that the matrix model has been adapted, and you know about the Friendship House in San Francisco, where the Western model of the matrix model has been culturally adapted to Native practices. And we've seen that coping with depression has also been adapted culturally. What we also know is that indigenous knowledge, as Sean has and Stephanie so well has presented, has existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. Western world wants to see randomized clinical control studies before we believe that anything works. Here we think we need to find a middle ground. And what we do know is that when we do that, we know age-specific initiatives for women has worked. We also know that honoring our elders have worked. Enhancing women's social support is extremely important, and also to connect her to her community so she can get the support she needs from her communities, from her elders. I'm leaving this to you, Sean and Stephanie. Are you there?
Yes, Stephanie?
Yeah, I was actually thinking that maybe that would be better covered by you.
Okay. Okay, so remember that many of the tribes, their teachings are a little bit different. The Algonquians were some of the first ones that had met Europeans when they first came across. But the story was that they were met both by men and women leaders and healers. Out of respect, the natives kept their women in the back in the villages and stuff because of the Europeans' belief systems that they had already had. So over time, many of the tribes kind of followed suit, but since then, the tribes have kind of looked at women a little bit different, and that's part of the reason we have either paternal tribes or maternal tribes. So part of this is remembering that also that blood quantum and enrollment, it was not a traditional practice. And at this time, it's like Native Americans are the only people required, in a sense, to have a pedigree.
Okay,
Okay.
Stephanie. um, when we're growing up as young girls and young women, we get some teachings about moon time, which is our we talk about our first menses and then also menstruation throughout life. This is a topic that's kind of uncomfortable for some people, but with us, it's something that's actually just seen as very natural, and it's pretty common to talk about these things. And young girls are brought up in our culture, they are trained and brought up by their aunts and grandmothers and their mothers. So a very strong female network that helps to raise the young girls. Um, there have been a lot of sort of conflicting information about how um, girls are seen when they are on their moon time. And there have been people have been taught to sort of beware or to be careful around women on their moon time. Some of those people are definitely the medicine people and the spiritual leaders. And we are taught to be very careful around sacred objects, and you definitely do not step over them. And typically, you just do not touch any of those things. And back in time, we actually were removed to a smaller version of the Ouija shelter for someone on their moon time. We are taught about our power during that time. We understand that we actually can cleanse or we have spiritual power during that time, and so a lot of times sickness and things like that can come through us, and we can help heal. It's a time that we are to be very responsible for others and ourselves, because during that time you're also you have to be aware of what your own personal limitations are as far as what you can handle and all of that. And we are considered to be conduits of Mother Earth. And also, on top of that, since we have a sort of natural cleansing period on a regular basis, we are not necessarily required to participate in sweat lodge or things like that, although that's definitely allowed. But we aren't necessarily obligated to do that like men would be. Um, there are some that we've come across now more recently where you see or hear people talking about moon time being it's a dirty thing. And really that comes more from what I'll just give you some personal background on that. My great grandmother was the person who raised me, and she would talk about that and say that that's not a dirty thing. It's where life comes from. And the people that are actually afraid of that are bad people. So because we are known to be able to cleanse that like negative energy and things like that, then those people who are doing bad things around to other people can get their medicine wiped out. And so that's where that belief came from, and that fear came from, and it's kind of become more of a common thing among all of the people. And then not all medicine people or spiritual leaders fear women when they're on their moon time because they have certain protections, or and they understand the process of that and the natural cleansing that it is, and it's not a negative thing, and so they can continue their healing among people even on their moon time. There are strict guidelines and ways of that there's protocol. Let's say that there's protocol as far as how healing is done when someone is on their time. But typically, women are not present at certain ceremonies, or they're kept in a certain area, just to protect anyone else because everything just it protects the woman, and it protects everyone else also. Sean?
Okay, I can start.
This is very important.
Yeah, so many
Yeah.
have heard about the 13 indigenous grandmothers, but before this was it was the prophecy of the 13 grandmothers. It's not always known to all peoples, but let's see, I think they're in the back of the time of early 1900s is when actually the powers were being transferred from the 10 grandfathers to the 13 grandmothers. Remember, I've talked about the different medicine hoops. Well, these are the two different medicine hoops that come and go over time, but they're always transferred between each other. So one thing that may seem new to one generation, in a sense, may be older far before. So when the 13 grandmothers come, they come in a time of great change, a cleansing, and leadership for those that are upon Mother Earth. So then during this time, we see many women becoming leaders, healers, and so much more. We see the world's axis would shift. That was foretold that those things would happen. During this time, more of the seventh generation children would arrive to help Mother Earth and the 13 grandmothers in change of what is needed. So there's a big change that is happening around that so it was kind of interesting being taught this, and over time seeing what happens within the world, seeing many more leaders coming up, seeing women doing many great things in life now. So within these teachings, we see what's happening in the world. We see many becoming leaders and working towards change upon Mother Earth. Again, like the 13 indigenous grandmothers, they're not the same. The 13 grandmothers were originally spirits. But the 13 indigenous grandmothers came later on to bring peace upon the earth. the seventh generation. Many people talk about the seventh generations, but that's a little bit different than the seventh generation children, because these come in more like of an era, but they have been coming for centuries. It's more like an arrowhead in a sense, going through uh, like a jungle in a sense. The very first person who comes through kind of hacks some leaves like with a machete or something and makes this path. The second person comes in there having a hard time, but he's still following this old path, and he's makes it a little wider. So over time, this path becomes easier and easier as more people come through in the seventh generation. So this also goes into the rainbow people, or the rainbow nation, which came right before them, is because the rainbow children, or the rainbow people, they were like rainbow warriors. They came to prepare things before the seventh generation came. So
Thank you very much, Sean. I am always fascinated when you talk about the 13 grandmothers, and there are people across the country where we actually think we know some of the grandmothers alive at the moment. Very respected women, elder women. So now we have started off with putting you in the mindset of what is important to think about when you plan working with women, and then we have thrown in some Western and culturally informed practices, and now ending with reminding us all about the importance of understanding the culture but being humble, and understand that humility means you ask questions because you don't really understand before you know what the woman sitting in front of you is thinking about and where her cultural mindset is coming from. So can we answer your questions?
I see Valerie.
Sean, there is a question here. Do you want to take this, Kate?
or Stephanie?
Right. Yeah, I just noticed the
Yeah.
question. It says, how do mindfulness techniques overlap with native traditions that might also involve meditation, such as fasting, that Sean mentioned? So, actually, it's really interesting because you get today's sort of wordage and sort of some catchphrases like meditation or yoga or mindfulness or practicing presence, that kind of thing. But our people have actually been doing that for all of these years, and we just didn't have those words to describe it. It would be just something as part of your day. I don't know if anybody remembers a grandfather just kind of sitting and just kind of going within himself while everyone else is bustling around them. I remember seeing older people doing that kind of regularly, and it was just part of their practice. It's not, this sounds kind of silly, but it wasn't someone who was just falling asleep while everyone else is, watching TV or something. It's not like that, but you could see that there was something else going on. And so there's the practice of meditation, or the practice of presence in terms of mindfulness, has always been practiced by our people. And I truly believe that that's directly connected also to humility, because if you're humble, you go within yourself and understand that you are connected to everything else, and you also are equal to everything else. You're not better than. And so it's part of that practice as well. So I hope that answered the question.
Yes, it's actually part of, in a sense, the medicine wheel, because there comes a certain age or time where somebody is driven, they feel a drive to learn more about spirituality or medicine, that kind of life. But there's also part of a time frame when it's perfect for them, and that's usually around 25, 26, 27 years old, when they're more mature to be able to understand things about the world and themselves. And they say that the very first place you start is you tend to go back in time, in a sense, and looking at your whole life from that present time to your birth. So, in a sense, it changes like a metamorphosis as you learn and kind of challenge, in a sense, false beliefs. Learn about yourself, but also in becoming more than you are. So it becomes more of a personal evolution, and then you begin forward again to where you were at that present time, so that you can grow. Is there any more questions?
I think that was a very good question. And it reminds me again about how important it is to learn from the native elders for all of us, because the practice of meditation, contemplation, and not the very fast Western life is very much, it's very important for us to learn from the native communities.
Yeah, part of the mindfulness is also remembering that no matter what you do in life, no matter who you're speaking to, that there can always be some kind of consequence. And a lot of times, even with certain kind of things, it's like how things can go back upon people. That's what they usually say, but it's much like karma. So the way I kind of explain it is that, well, what if a father's mad one day, he goes outside, kicks a neighbor's dog um, for being in his yard or something. The dog goes across the street or something, um, bites the child or something like that because it's mad. Then the child gets in trouble from the mother, and somehow the mother complains to the father, and the father's in trouble, so he goes back over there to the neighbor who kicked the dog, and they may have never known it at all. And then all of a sudden there's a fight, and the father who originally kicks the dog gets hit. So it always comes full circle, and you need to remember that everything that is being done, in a sense, we have to remember that there's always some kind of consequence in what we do. So you're always kind of mindful of that.
I have to say that you guys have been a very good audience. I would have loved to have more questions from you, but sometimes I know that it's a little intimidating to start writing us questions. You can't see us. You may not have any idea who we are. But with that, I think that if you feel you have questions to any of us, please send us emails or send things to Kate, and she can channel the questions to us. What I want to say is that I am glad we are back and that we can continue working with you all. And I would love to also hear of things you want us to bring up in this webinar series. So thank you all, and I want to thank Sean and Stephanie for being online, and I'm letting it go to Kate.
Someone is asking to make sure that they have our email addresses.
Yes. Kate has posted her email address, and I can post mine. I think you have them all available to you now.
Okay, I think I have microphone rights again. This is Kate, and just wanted to thank everyone for joining us for our first webinar of 2018. We are going to be working on the schedule and should be getting announcements out for upcoming webinars shortly. So just watch for those on the listserv. And once again, we'll be sending out some follow-up with a survey link, with the recording link, handouts, and just let us know if you have questions, and thanks again, and hope you join us next time.
And I want to reiterate that it is very, very important for you and for us that we have you complete the GIPRA forms.
Wonderful. All right, well, I will close this out, and thanks so much, everybody, and thanks to our